Hello, good morning, and welcome to the information session specifically designed for the province of BC. We thank you so much for joining us. My name is Selena Dorme. I'm with the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, and I'm also from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver, but I'd also like to recognize our neighboring nations here in this unceded territory of the Squamish and the Musqueam peoples. We do have some panelists here on our screen that you can see, so I'm going to quickly introduce them. We have Jehan, the Director of the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, Howard Grant, Executive Director of the First Nations Summit Society, Collette Sunday, Band Administrator for the Upper Nicola Band, and Sandra Wesley-Olson, Director of Operations for Hagwilget Village. So thank you all so much for joining us. As I mentioned, this is a special information session that we've designed for the BC government employees, which I think most of you are. So again, I just want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to hear a little bit more about the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. We hope that from this information session, we can definitely build a better relationship with you all. So thank you so much. I'm going to now go ahead and hand it over to our first speaker, who is Howard Grant.
Thank you, Selena. Good morning, everyone. I'm Howard Grant, but my traditional name is Kayapalanuk, and as an FYI to all of you, that it was my great-great-great-grandfather who met the first white man that come into our territory in 1791. It was Captain Narvaez, and then following that in 1792, it was Captain Vancouver. So I carry that traditional name. I'm Kayapalanuk the seventh of a direct descent and privilege of carrying that name. And I want to say welcome to each and every one of you. I'm speaking to you from the sunny traditional homelands of the Hunkaminam speaking peoples of Musqueam. So I have the honor and the privilege today to give you probably an introductory to why First Nations Public Service and in regards to a public service within the First Nations themselves. So hopefully I don't bore you with history, but I think it's quite important. First and foremost, I would like to say that we had a very highly complex governance structure pre-contact at the earliest point in time. But over the time of the coming of the European, we've lost that ability because the colonial introduction of the Westminster model was imposed upon us and placed us into a more socialist setting on reserves. So, and I want, as a first note to all of you, that to not consider using the word Coast Salish, because it's a European concept that's been placed upon us to try to box us into a grouping so that it's much easier to deal with in a more aggregate collective as opposed to independent and individual entities. You know, so that's why we in Musqueam are the Hunkaminam, that we share a similar language with the Tsleil-Waututh and the people from the Squamish Nation as well. Likewise, those of you who live over in Victoria area, that you welcome people from into the Lekwungen territory. So, and again, it's a European concept that even we, as many of our young natives, use as Coast Salish people. And I note this because over in Europe, the majority of people speak either German, French, English, and Italian. But you have independent nations like Poland, Austria, Belgium, Switzerland, and you don't have a language called Swissese or whatever, or Belgiumese. So that's just a note for all of you to recognize that we're all not the same as well. You know, some are patrilineal, some are matrilineal, some have a history of being nomadic, whereas others, especially on the coast, that were non-nomadic, and as well that time for us did not begin in 1846 upon the signing of the Oregon Treaty. But government has chosen that date for some god-awful reason, because that's when British Columbia, I guess more or less, or Canada was being formed as a nation. So you look at those kinds of situations, because 1846, mass migration had already started to take place, natives and Europeans alike, because where there was forts and opportunities for economic employment and gain was being established on these lands. So I give that as a backgrounder to where we want to go in regards to developing ourselves and a relationship with you. So way back when MAR, the Ministry of MAR, was first conceived, I was a bureaucrat as a senior official within the Federal Civil Service, working with, at that time, called DIAND. And MAR was created, and MAR said, quote unquote, "We will not be like DIAND. We will be very, very different." But today, lo and behold, it's very, very similar, because what's happened now is that MAR has become the ministry almost totally responsible and the go-to in regards to the relationship between First Nations and the government of British Columbia. Whereas with DIAND, it was DIAND that took on that responsibility on behalf of all of the departments of the federal government. And when you see those kinds of things occurring in MAR, that it took them a long period of time, because as MAR was being established, they sent their bureaucrats to interest-based negotiations training and whatnot, so that they didn't want to be positional, and that's based on a treaty process. But as well, too, each ministry started to hire people as Aboriginal relations officers. Those Aboriginal relations officers didn't hold a very senior seat within their ministry, i.e., I don't know the terminology used for the civil service of the province, but within the federal system, you have what you call PM3, PM4, PM5, PM6, PM7, EXs, and senior management. And I would equate the Indigenous Relations Officer within the ministries as probably a PM4, PM5 person who didn't have nor wield very much power of influence, but more or less information and support to the senior officials within that ministry. So it presented a whole new challenge, that how did this ministry and how did other provincial ministries become more engaged? It still proved to be a challenge that couldn't be overcome. And over time, we on our side, there was a number of us who recognized that we had a growing population of First Nations public civil servants that started in the early 70s and grew to a large public administration within First Nations communities, delivering delegated programs and services that were offered by Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. So our civil service started to grow, but it was only a delegated option. And we recognized that in order to become much more self-reliant and government to government or nation to nation, we needed to develop a stronger base and foundation and capacity to do that. So with the help of the province, under the guidance of then Deputy Minister Lauren Brownsey, we were offered a 3-year pilot to develop our First Nations public service. And from there, we introduced the 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars talked about senior management, i.e. a band manager or chief administrative officer, as being a very critical component, and along with finance, a chief financial officer, and the groupings that would go with that. Then we also recognized that the 3rd pillar was human resource management, having that kind of skill and ability to retain good public servants for our communities and our nations. And then last but not least, records information management, because history is part of who we are, and most of us are oral tradition, but we needed to now put that down in writing, and all of the correspondence and literature and whatever else in regards to that Crown relations that we've had over the last 100+ years. So with that, it was a recognition at that particular time that in order for the province to go forward in a new dawning of a relationship, that was a requirement to build up the First Nations public service. Simultaneously, we also went to the federal government to seek their support. At the headquarters level, especially at the president of the Public Service Commission, they saw that as a reality. They strongly supported it verbally, but they could not put it into play simply because a pilot could not be considered. It had to be a national kind of a program. So we didn't gain any kind of support financially or otherwise at that particular time. So then over a period of time, as the province and us try to negotiate a tripartite relationship to seek that support to continue the relationship under First Nations Public Service, there was a clear recognition and a strong foundational support that garnered a lot of other support from our leadership. So subsequently, the Leadership Council endorsed this relationship and this public service as a necessity. So when you look at those kinds of things, and then you say, okay, how, why, and what for, that we need to look at how and why you, the provincial government, the provincial crown, should buy into this wholeheartedly. Simply because of the dawning of this new era and this legislation that was most recently passed, i.e. the DRIPA legislation. In there, it contains a clause that says it is to recognize the traditional forms of governance of the nations within British Columbia. And UNDRIP, the UN Declaration, as well has that clause in there to recognize that. And many nations now, and in particular mine, we are now moving towards eliminating the Westminster model of governance that were imposed upon us and Musqueamizing our governance structure that replicates to a large degree how we governed ourselves pre-contact. So, and the province is now coming to the realization that their only introduction and education to dealing with First Nations was always just the city Indian, those second, third, fourth, and fifth generation that resided in the big cities, those who were non-status, those who were Métis, and they never ever really understood nor had on-the-ground intelligence in regards to the First Nations and who resided in their home communities and had a strong and vibrant culture, economic programming and whatnot. And then now with this new relationship, treaty, self-government and whatnot, it's gaining a stronger and more vibrant foothold in regards to this true form of reconciliation and new relationship. And in order to do that, we continuously recognize that the fact that we can't do it independently. Even you, the Crown, the British, the public service of the province cannot do it independently within each ministry. The government of British Columbia requires institutions that support its ability to govern properly. You have Crown corporations and other entities similar to a Crown corporation that provide that option and those opportunities so that good governance can flow directly. You know, as an example, you have the Land Title Survey Authority, which manages the land titles and whatnot. that is a government responsibility, but they've hived it off into a Crown corporation. And you also have the Whistler Land Corporation that deals with Crown lands that are potentially going up for sale, hydro, etc. So you have those kinds of things. And then internally, you have also structures, institutions that support you, each provincial ministry. Those institutions are DOJ, Finance, Treasury Board, and they are the ones that have a strong supporting background and understanding and to ensure that good governance is indeed in play. So we look at those kinds of things, and we're establishing some of those now. We have a First Nations Tax Authority. We have a First Nations Land Management Board. We have a First Nation Financial Management Board. And we have the First Nations Health Authority, First Nations Education Steering Committee. Those are institutions that can support the individual First Nations governments. But at the same time, we need to develop our internal capacity at the First Nations, because as we take on more and more of your programming and services, example, the Child Welfare Act that's coming into play, we need that capacity not only to deliver the program, but to manage it in a responsible manner, and the capacity to have the human resource and the financial management tools to do that. So we look to you and we say to you that we're still using your policies. We are not independent. So therefore, every time that you develop a new internal policy or an operational policy, we're left out in the dark. And we don't know how to implement those policies because they're not given to us in the forefront. We're not brought in at the talking stage of how those policies and operational policies and rules and regulations are being developed in order to have good governance. So we need to develop that kind of two-way communication and relationship. But in order to do that, we need to have the capacity on our side of the table to understand those kinds of responsibilities and that machinery of governance that you have within your system. To also recognize that ours isn't exclusively to you, the Crown province, but we also have a relationship with the federal Crown and the local municipality and their bylaws. So ours is 3- and 4-fold compared to yours, which is, again, looking at only provincial legislation. So be mindful of those kinds of things and those things are not taught at a post-secondary institution. Public admin is public admin is public admin. Yes, I understand. But ours is a more unique and has to be garnered through on-the-ground growth and intelligence. So we look to you as the bureaucrats of the province of British Columbia, especially to your senior officials, that they can't just allow MAR to scrape and find resources to support the First Nations public service. It's every provincial ministry that has that responsibility, because today it's not just MAR negotiating, but it's also the Ministry of Environment, FLNRO, Energy Mines, and Forestry, and all you have to do is read the releases that are coming out fast and furious. But we don't have that capacity to deal with those kinds of things on a daily basis. You have a multitude of ministries and of which you have a large capacity to ensure that they understand the policies, the operational policies, the legislation, etc. Whereas we're lucky to have one person that will look after all of the social servicing sector. So we look at those kinds of things today and we say, we need your support. We need you to be involved with us. We need you to see that we're not trying to replicate, but we also recognize that many of the institutions that you have created and supported i.e. Post-secondary institutions that put on these courses of cross-cultural training and some tools and mechanisms of public administration are not there. They're not built from the ground. They've never come to us, the First Nations, and saying what kind of courses should be, what curriculum should be developed in order to have a certification of this program. So that, do we have executive interchange between the province and First Nations? Those kinds of things. So I should have said at the very onset that the start of our the MAR relationship, the Diane BC region offered some of our senior managers as an executive interchange to the province, so that you would clearly go on the road and not make the same mistakes that the federal government did and was continuing to do. But they never took advantage of that at that particular time. I know I'm going on, and I want to conclude by saying that I have much more to say and to offer and to provide to you. But hopefully that this presentation only entices you to say we want more, and the First Nations Public Service Secretariat can create additional opportunities for all of you. So again, I want to say thank you to Selena and the First Nations Public Service Secretariat for having me participate on this at this particular time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Howard. As always, appreciate your words. I feel that they always resonate with everybody. I can't see the attendees' faces, but I feel like there's always a lot of nodding heads when you're talking. So thank you so much for that presentation. Next up, we have Jehan Casey. So if I can have you turn on your video, thank you so much. Jehan Casey is the director of the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. So she is going to share a deck and talk a little bit more about the FNPSS. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Selena, and thank you, Howard. I agree with Selena. I've heard you speak to these issues a number of times, and I'm always listening and picking up new pieces. So I'm sure our provincial colleagues were as well. Thank you again, all of you, for coming to join us today. Again, my name is Jehan Casey. I am Haida. I'm a member of the Skidegate Indian Band, and absolutely privileged to be on interchange from the federal government, going on my 3rd year here with the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. And of course, I'm at home like so many of us. I am coming to you from the traditional territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish peoples. And I am really here just to tell you a little bit of the nuts and bolts about what FNPSS does. Howard, who is one of the individuals who is instrumental in, I think, starting the FNPSS, driving to get funding and support from government partners and engaging with First Nations about what they needed, has covered a lot of how we got here and why we got here. We're now up in operations again. I say again because we had a bit of a hiatus from before I was involved with a previous incredible employees and leadership for the FNPSS. Our first time around, and like so many First Nation organizations, funding was an issue. So we're coming up on our 3rd year of being back. So we're still fairly new, but again, as Howard indicated, the concept of public service to support governance in First Nations goes back to pre-contact in our First Nations. There was a way of governing, a way of managing, a way of decision making in all of our nations. And our role is simply to support that strong administration and governance. And as our First Nation public services, of course, have to navigate that, both with their traditional ways of managing it and the whole new world of dealing with federal government, provincial government, economic development, business, just everything else that goes with public administration. So I can go on and on and on, and I will try not to. But very quickly, let's see if I can do the first thing I'm supposed to do, which is share this deck with you. There we go. You'd think after so many Zoom calls, we'd all have that down to a science now, but I have to think about it every time. So I'll go through here, and again, as Selena mentioned, please put your questions in the chat. We want to get to them, as many of them as possible. So we are a provincial level body. Our mandate comes well from First Nations, but formally through the First Nations Leadership Council. Many years ago, the First Nations Leadership Council recognized the importance of strengthening the capacity of First Nations and First Nation administrations, that this was going to be absolutely critical for First Nations to successfully implement their right to self-determination. One of the other pieces is, in order to engage in a government-to-government relationship, as in a true government-to-government relationship, one of the key elements of what will be a successful implementation of DRIPA is a strong public administration in our nations. So from that perspective, FNPSS is critical to the successful implementation of DRIPA, only in that we are supporting the absolute critical backbone of those nations' ability to have good governance and engage in successful intergovernmental relations. And then what do? Just in short, relevant training and capacity to support that public service within First Nations, and also a coordination function, an intergovernmental relations function that I will talk about a little bit more. We work to strengthen and support the relationships between First Nations leadership and administration, and other levels of government and neighboring communities. So Howard touched on some of these. I mean, these are, if you work with First Nations, you've probably heard some of them. If you work in the public service with anything to do with supporting HR within the BC government, this list of challenges here probably looks pretty familiar to you in either way. Working in the federal government for years, we struggled with recruitment of new staff, retention of the great staff that we had, how to form strong networks, how to access training. We all assume that our policy world is the most complex one ever that we're ever dealing with. Think about this in terms of a First Nation community. Recruitment is even more difficult, especially one of the principles that, or the priorities that FNPSS has, is to recruit young people to be interested in a role in public administration, and then to pursue the post-secondary education they need to get there. Just right off the bat, of course, most people know First Nation graduates from post-secondary is not where it should be compared to other graduation rates. And then hiring them on when a First Nation can't necessarily afford to pay the same salary as they might get somewhere else. When the people in the community might have left the community for post-secondary, and it's difficult to come back. So, I mean, I could probably spend an hour on this slide alone, but just running through, if you think of all of these in terms of how the BC Public Service deals with them, and then the added complexities in a First Nation. Overcoming these is important for First Nations in particular, as they're implementing UNDRIP as well, as they are taking on the responsibilities that are required to be able to implement UNDRIP and really effectively share their rights with government and implement those rights. And their responsibilities are increasing. They're taking on more and more jurisdiction. The scope of the work that First Nations are doing is just increasing and increasing, as it should be. But that requires a strong public service to do it effectively, to manage those sophisticated operations and policies and legislative and legal and all of those pieces that come into it. There's a shortage of trained professionals, trained First Nation professionals in BC and all across Canada. So FNPSS is there to support coordinated training, support training that is connected to First Nations culture and our historical ways of governing wherever possible, to work with partners. We're also provide a role in creating a better relationship between, a better working relationship, I should say, between First Nations leadership, chief and council, or political leadership and administration, as well as First Nations relationships with other levels of government, how they can access it, how they can share what they need, and how you can better get the information you need to get to them. So again, happy to answer questions on any of these going forward. This smiling lady here is Bab Stevens. She is the CAO, the administrator for Skidegate Indian Band. It's just a coincidence that that's my band. She is on the board for FNPSS, our Band Administrators Advisory Board that I'll talk to you a little bit more. She's sitting there at one of our booths. I think that's at the federal government joint gathering there, but we do this to a number of events, and our board members come out and volunteer their time. So we do a lot more than just developing training. As a matter of fact, we develop very little training. We work with capacity building. We do some training. Mentorship is a huge aspect of what we do. And I'll go through all of these in a little bit more detail. But here's the areas we've been focusing. Of course, consultation with First Nations. We can't do what we do without understanding what First Nations need, what they need from us, how they want to coordinate, all of those pieces. The intergovernmental collaboration and relationship building is key. Again, especially as all levels of government are struggling to figure out the best way. In BC, you have legislation, you're a step ahead with DRIPA, but how to implement that, how to really engage in a true government-to-government manner. And for the federal government, they don't have that type of legislation, but there's still a need to figure out how every federal department or every provincial ministry can really take on the role that it should be and needs to play on engaging with First Nations. We work with other Indigenous organizations and agencies. In particular, when I say that we don't deliver a lot of our own training, one of the things that we support First Nations to do is to find the training that exists from our partners. So if the First Nations Management Board has some fabulous training available and we have a First Nation that we know has that need, it's part of our role to make sure that they're connected, that they have that training, that they know about that training. Our partners at AFOA, the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association, we work with them to set up and connect to existing training and existing resources. And then we try to work with those organizations to coordinate the training and the work that we're doing together so that we are providing a holistic package of support to First Nations. I say try. We've only been at it for a few years. These other organizations have been at it for a long time. Just like government, we struggle to coordinate, but we're trying. And that's our role to support that. And then lastly, we know partnership with professional organizations. So IPAC, ARMA, which is the Association of Records Managers, we deal with them because they just have such expertise and they can help support what's happening in First Nations community in terms of training capacity, tool development, all of those pieces. I'm probably taking longer than I should, as we all have a tendency to do when we're talking about things that get us excited. So a little bit about the capacity building and training we do. These pictures here, you will probably recognize the two at the top. That is Grand Chief Stuart Phillips speaking, and laughing a little bit at him is Grand Chief Stephen Point. They spoke at our last in-person conference we were able to have last November that had about 200 participants at it, and they spoke about their experience in public administration in a First Nation community and relating it to traditional governance and what they thought the First Nation public service, not FNPSS, but the public service and First Nations in particular, needed to take on. And we're thrilled to have them as supporters of FNPSS and the role and the importance of a First Nation public service. They've lived it. Their experience is fantastic, and we draw on it all the time. The other group, equally important, is a group of First Nation public administrators sharing their best practices at one of our workshops. So I think that's on Sunday from Adams Lake there. and Marcia, who I think is from Gitsan. I don't recognize the other two off the top of my head. They're too teeny, but that's a group of people who are talking about planning, infrastructure planning, strategic planning, and sharing tools and practices on that. So that's what we do. We get people together from First Nations to chat, share best practices. Since 2018, when we came back, we have trained literally hundreds of First Nation government employees. The demand's incredibly high. We are almost, well, I would actually say always full with waiting lists. The greatest, I think, challenge for First Nations to take some of this training is time away from their jobs. They're some of the busiest people, I think, in the entire world. And then, of course, cost. For us to be able to deliver it at a cost that's manageable with the limited funding we have, and for First Nations with the limited funding they have to put aside money to train and develop their own employees. But I'm happy to elaborate on those at any point. We recently launched a leadership training program that was hugely successful. We had over 170 people register. It was a 6-series webinar. And for me, the indicator of success is how many of those people were still showing up at the end of the 6th session. And it was well over 100 participants. This was focused on both elected leadership in First Nations as well as senior administrators. And we hope to offer another session, and dependent upon funding, offer part 2 and 3 of this session that would provide that core training for leadership in a First Nation. Our management training academies we offer regularly. We have a group of mentors, which are senior band administrators linking up with less experienced to share experience. We also have a virtual network where they connect. And of course, I spoke of our conferences, like where those two prestigious Grand Chiefs spoke, and a number of webinars like what you're on right now. Consultation with BC First Nations, I kind of feel like this is just such a given. If we didn't get direction from First Nations, we wouldn't be doing our job. This is where we go out and really just ask, what do you need? What can we help with? How can we support your administration to be stronger and your governance to be stronger? We initially had a strategy to physically go out for the first time since our restart a couple of years ago, and do in-person engagement with absolutely, well, as many as possible First Nations in BC. Obviously, because of COVID, that's been delayed. We have feedback to reaffirm our mandate and our work plan through a number of our conference feedback. And of course, we've been doing it virtually, engaging through discussions, roundtables, all those pieces. But we hope that at some point we'll be able to restart that more fulsome engagement. That's important mostly because the last time that our strategy as FNPSS was revised was in 2010, and a lot has changed since then. The relationship with government, the scope of our other First Nation organizations, legislation in a number of areas. So looking at the context and how we need to shift to ensure that we are as relevant and efficient as possible is something that we really feel is important we get out, and we do soon. In particular, as DRIPA unfolds, as that's implemented for the BC government, the structures and supports that are needed to support First Nation individual governments as through First Nation institutions and governing bodies is something that needs to be continually revised. What do we need so that we are supporting all BC nations to engage appropriately, and what kind of support do they need for strong governance is something that we're working with our partners to be part of and to support. Let's see, and this is one of my favorite ways that we do consultation with First Nations. This is some of the members of our Band Administrators Advisory Committee, smiling, happy people that they are. Two of them are going to speak to you shortly, Sandra and Collette, so I won't spend too long introducing them. Sue in the middle is a program manager who works for Coquitlam First Nation in lands and taxation. Babs, as I mentioned, is the CIO at Skidegate. Laura is the band administrator at Coldwater. And we have a couple of other newer members. I think we're totaling 6 on the committee at the moment. We try to get from a spread of regions and size of First Nations, various different criteria on our committee to provide input to what we do. They're just not pictured in this particular picture. And they provide input on absolutely everything we do. They tell me when I'm doing something that isn't useful. They tell me what we should be doing that would make the biggest impact. They tell us what they're currently struggling with right now. They tell us when communication from the government is not going well and how we can try to carry that message back to government, work with a leadership council, try to support what is actually happening on the ground in communities. One other important key group of individuals we've engaged with is we just held a very successful youth roundtable for young First Nation leaders from across BC. They provided input into how we can better engage youth to participate in administration and governance in their community, how we can recruit them and support them in pursuing post-secondary that will lead to those careers in their communities. And the ideas that came from them, we're writing up a report at the moment. It was only about a week and a half ago, but talking about succession planning so that they can take on administration roles, ways of developing students through a fast track opportunity to encourage them to come back to their communities and work in administration in their band offices. Opportunities for job shadowing, opportunities for job shadowing in other governments, the province, the feds, municipalities, so they can learn how other governments operate. And the challenges of leaving their communities, returning to their communities, and post-secondary. They also had some fantastic ideas about how they can support networking and engagement virtually because they are good with technology. So there's a whole aspect of that that is critically important to our work going forward, and we'll have more to share soon. I've spoken about this intergovernmental collaboration and relationship building. So the picture on the right here is a signatory or a signing day. We did last June, we signed an MOU with the BC Federal Council, which is a group of 47 federal departments and agencies that have a base here in BC. And 17 of those federal departments individually signed on in support of that MOU. And it's to support bilateral sharing, capacity building that benefits both First Nations public service and the federal public service. So this is a picture of that signing. Of course, we also have a relationship with the BC government. We have an existing MOU also with the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation and the BC Public Service Agency. This was signed many, many years ago, and we've been working with these two agencies to revise and renew that MOU. We really hope to do that soon. And one of the discussions that we've had is especially with DRIPA and the new context is how can we take that MOU and spread it across or include other ministries from across the province, because it's really not, it's not just MIR. It never was, it never should have been, but I think we all relied on that relationship, and we feel it's important that we engage with all of the ministries and agencies across BC. We also were very lucky to have 2 Indigenous youth interns placed with us this summer, which is a project that, again, FNPSS has been a supporter of since the beginning of the IIP. It was the Aboriginal Youth Internship program previously, and is just an absolutely gold star for the province. So kudos for that. I think it's fantastic, and it's something that we'd like to emulate with our other levels of government and what we do with our own First Nations. Some of the things that we are doing with the federal government, because we have had a more active partnership with our BC regional contacts from the federal government than we necessarily have had with the province so far. Developing an internship program for young Indigenous professionals within the federal government, similar to IIP. Providing training for federal government managers on how to better support Indigenous First Nation employees. We have opportunities for federal public servants to contribute their time and expertise to projects that FNPSS is taking on. So for example, speaking about HR at one of our training events, engaging with a First Nation group on policy development in a particular area, as a volunteer interchange opportunity. We're developing a resource guide on the various federal programs that are available to BC First Nations, so it's a one-stop shop. We're planning an annual joint learning day with for BC First Nation public servant employees and Government of Canada employees. And we're working to share the available courses that the Government of Canada has through their school, their virtual school with First Nations, if they're interested in taking them. And we hope that all of these and all kinds of many other great ideas can be done in partnership with the provincial government as well. And I'm definitely going over time, so I'm going to start talking quickly. One of the key successes we had recently was supporting First Nations during COVID. Because of our network with the federal government and the provincial government as well, we were able to turn around information and get information out to First Nations very quickly, more quickly than the mechanism of government was able to do on their own. These pictures here are fact sheets that we released. Again, we heard the need because we work directly with First Nations. That, for example, their band administrations were being overwhelmed with asks from off-reserve members trying to navigate the supports coming from 10 different federal and provincial groups, the rent subsidies, the CERB, all those different pieces. And could we not just put it all in one simple to read place that was specific to both BC and First Nations? Nobody had that. There was nothing that dealt with BC First Nation needs specifically. We did a number of others based on food security, housing. They're all on our website. In partnership with federal and provincial government, we developed a COVID-specific information website, and we have done 19, I think it's actually more now. I have 19 in my notes, but I think we've done more than 19, just over 20 webinars and town halls with First Nations sharing what they have done during COVID with other First Nations, and town halls with government officials. We had EMBC, for example, I think on one from the province, FNHA, various federal, CRA, and of course, Indigenous Services, speaking about funding, challenges, opportunities, access, things that were changing so quickly, getting that information out to First Nations quickly, and allowing First Nations leadership and administration the opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback right away. It was, I think, a really good example of what we can do when we mobilize quickly based on the networks that we've built. And this picture, again, one of my favorite, this is where I spoke about us working with other First Nation organizations and institutions. You probably recognize a whole bunch of these people. This is the signing of a protocol that we signed with the Assembly of First Nations, the Summit Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the First Nations Financial Management Board, the First Nations Tax Commission, that's Nanny Jewels sitting in the middle there. The First Nations Finance Authority, Ernie Daniels is not pictured. He had to go deal with a crisis. The Lands Advisory Board, that's Chief Robert Louis. The Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of BC, the New Relationship Trust, and of course ourselves. And this was momentous for a number of reasons. Formalizing that we were going to work together, that we were going to communicate and coordinate, that we were going to act as a united body in advocating and supporting capacity and coordination for good governance in First Nations is something we were all doing, but this made it formal. And we have been meeting and working to move together on a number of fronts. Again, I'm running out of time, but I will happily speak on any of these in more detail going forward, and any of our partners, I'm sure, would be happy to talk about this as well. And again, here's some smiling folks. This is at the IPAC conference, national conference. This was in Manitoba, working with IPAC, working with ARMA, of course, the Local Government Management Association of BC. We gain their expertise and get to use it for our training sessions, for our toolkits, for all of the pieces that we do. We also make a point of going to their events and sharing information and supporting their professional networks to provide more information about First Nations administration, Indigenous culture, relationships with First Nations. The more we can continue to raise awareness with other levels of professionals, the better relationships they will have working with First Nation governments. And we've worked with Civic Info BC a lot. We're working with them more, I hope, in the next year to really look at some of the tools that work really well for local governments and how we can make them work for First Nations on a coordinated manner as well. And finally, I'm going to stop talking. These are our happy volunteers at our last conference. They were exhausted at this point. This was 2 days of hard work, but we managed to get them to smile anyway. This is for the next 2 to 3 years. We will continue to move forward. We have project-based funding. We don't have any core funding. Some of it is from MER, so thank you. Some of it is from the federal government, Indigenous Services Canada. And project by project, we put in proposals and get more of it approved. So we hope to expand on this work plan with additional funding if we can going forward. That list of challenges for First Nations is not getting smaller, and we have more we can do. Really, before I turn it over to 2 of our band administrators to speak, I would hope that all of you who are here listening will reach out to me. I hope to be overwhelmed by questions and comments and thoughts about how we can work together going forward. So with that, thank you again all so much for coming. We're here for questions, but I'm going to let Sandra and Collette speak now.
Thank you so much, Jehan. Sorry, I have to turn my camera on. It's a little sign of, it's me, we got to move on. We have lots of good questions already, so I'm kind of excited about that. Everybody, if you want a t-shirt, you got to volunteer. That's just how it goes. So hopefully you want to work with us in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sandra. Thank you again so much, Jehan, for your presentation. Sandra, if you can, oh, yep, sorry. Unmute yourself. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So good morning, everybody. My name is Sandra Olson. I'm the Director of Operations for Hagwilget. I've been here only for about just under 2 months now. So I'm really quite happy and excited about informing you all about why I have decided to become a band administrator. I've been a band administrator for about just over 15 years now. And one of the major reasons I had made that decision was because I grew up on First Nation community all my life. And as part of my growing up, I experienced firsthand what it's like to be First Nation, what kind of challenges we faced over the years. And I've heard from my grandparents and my parents what kind of challenges they faced when people started to put them on First Nation communities and just really zoning out some First Nation reserves. We started being put on into boundaries. Our lands were no longer our lands to roam and gather, fish. We have history with all of our territories throughout Canada, throughout BC, throughout the nation, throughout the world. All of our First Nations have history, and the history has been passed on through oral history and through our feast systems, and we all have knowledge of our own territories, and you will hear it right throughout BC, throughout Canada, what each of our territories are, what they mean to us, and how we actually share our wealth. We have a vast amount of wealth when it comes to our territories and the history behind it. So part of my reason for becoming a band administrator was really to help move our First Nation communities forward in a team effort, not only through the Chief of Council, but also the staff and the membership. And the membership really have a huge stake in the chief and council they choose, and then also the chief and council's choice in their band administrator. The band administrator has a huge weight on their shoulders when it comes to taking on this position. It's quite a lonely position. You're basically in the middle of the staff and the chief and council. Chief and council have expectations of the staff. We need to provide all of the programs and services with the very little money that we do get from ISC to provide these programs and services. And as you heard earlier, we are basically given a certain amount of money to administer the programs and services within each of our communities. And administrator position and responsibility is to really manage the resources, not only the human resources, but the financial resources, and to also utilize all of those resources in the best way possible. And then also to manage the expectations of not only your chief and council, but also the expectations of the membership. They rightfully so have huge expectations. And we need to manage those. We need to communicate to them what kind of work we can actually do with the budget we're provided. So part of the big thing with First Nation Public Service Secretariat is they are connecting us with people such as yourselves, the province, the ministries. We need to be able to partner with each and every one of you somehow, some way. We need to educate ourselves with how you work. You need to educate yourselves with how we work and what is important to us, what we value. We value our territories. We value our rivers, land, our people. None of those come into play when it comes to money and or those. It's always the land, the people, and the territories. The fish, the rivers, all of that, they all come into play. They're hugely important to us. They will always provide for our next generations. So we really need to make sure we make decisions that are going to continue to provide for our future generations. So that's one of the reasons why I've joined the Band Administrator Advisory Committee. The Band Administrator Advisory Committee that we have now, just crazy, huge wealth of support from each and every one of them. We all bring a different specialty. We all have different, all of our communities have different needs. We are probably more the same than we are different, but it's because of those differences that we need to ensure that we as band administrators know that how to provide that program and services to each of our community members. And I truly appreciate Jehan and our team for the support that they're giving all of the band administrators throughout BC. I truly enjoy the company and the sharing of knowledge from the other band administrators. And I look forward to more building capacity with the many different organizations that First Nation Public Service Secretariat has brought to us as First Nation communities and band administrators. So I thank you, and I look forward to more.
Thank you so much, Sandra. As always, so lovely to see you. And again, you're another speaker that I know that resonates with everybody. Always lovely to see you. Next up, we have Collette Sunday. So if I could have Collette turn on her video, audio. Hello, welcome. We can go ahead.
Okay, Waihashkahalt and Shy Squeeze, Collette Sunday. I'm the band administrator for Upper Nicola Band, which is one of the 7 Okanagan Nation communities in the Canadian side. We also have relatives south of the border in the that live or that are known as the Colville Confederated Tribes. So just to give an introduction to Upper Nicola, I shared a really short video with Selena, and I'm just going to ask her to press play. And this will give you an overview of who Upper Nicola Band is.
Okay, my apologies if it is loud right now. We've never actually tried to share a video here, so. Hopefully you can hear that.
My name is Harvey McLeod. I'm home here in Upper Nicola. We're on my home res in Custom, and I've been chief since March 2014 till today. We have 8 reserves. We live on Custom, Shannon, Spuffling, and probably about 30,000 acres of some prime country. And it's quite fortunate that we were born here and have lived here.
You didn't go this a lot.
Yeah. If we take care of ourselves and we take care of the land, things could be quite well for us. We were born here, we live here, and we've been here since time immemorial.
All right.
All
right. I don't know.
We just tried that for the first time, so we didn't know if that was going to work or not. Now we can see.
Did nobody hear it? Was it hard to hear?
It was really quiet.
Oh, that's too bad. But it will be available apparently on the Upper Nicola Band website sometime soon. So maybe we could share that link when it's available.
Yes, definitely. So as I had mentioned, Upper Nicola is one of 7 Okanagan Nation communities. I have been serving here as the band administrator 6 years. In September, it'll be 7 years. That's not to say that's the only time I've worked here in my office. When people talk about youth interns, have young people getting an opportunity to work in public administration, I was first exposed to working in public administration within our band office when I was a summer student as a teenager. So I've actually worked in our office in various positions over 25 years. So similar to many administrators, we have sat in many desks in many offices serving various duties for our community, serving our community members, whether it be working for our chief and councils, doing land management, estates management. I actually served on chief and council for a couple of terms. So I have a wealth of information about who our community is, what our priorities are. And prior to coming to work here at Upper Nicola, I worked in the federal service as well. So I had worked with Indigenous Services Canada and Gatineau at headquarters for 4 years in policy and strategic development. And it was interesting to see how government works on the other side of the table, where they have the best interests at heart per se to develop programs and services for us. But a lot of the times they don't live the life. It's very challenging to actually implement policies, procedures, programs for every community across the province or across the country. So it's quite interesting to think about how you can develop something that you think can work for all of us. And even within our own nation, we're 7 communities within one nation. It's even challenging to get us all unified in one direction, moving in a canoe in one direction. So let alone looking at 200 First Nations in the province or 600 plus across the country. So with that, it's always an interesting day as an administrator where you don't know what's going to hit your table from from day to day. Today I woke up and thought about, okay, this might be what I'm going to work on, but actually no, someone else has dictated what's going to happen for me instead. So just as I was listening to the previous speakers talk about some of our experiences that we share amongst ourselves as First Nations, some of the challenges to develop capacity, I started thinking about, my first thought was, I don't think we do a lot of work with the province right now. And I think there could be a lot of opportunities for us to open doors and create more opportunities to work together. But then I started thinking about it, and I've jotted down here 9 specific projects that Upper Nicola Band is working on with the province of BC right now. And some of them are really big projects. So one of them is the development of an adoption law. So under Bill C-92, with the opportunity to develop our own child and family laws, Upper Nicola Band is looking at specifically adopting an adoption law. So with our Upper Nicola Band Grandmothers Group, this is an initiative we started over the last couple of years. Looking at identifying what is our self-inherent right, how do you start to document that and put that into a law? So with the help of First Nations Public Service Secretariat and the IPAC group that they are working with, they brought in a volunteer to help us to start to piece together, how do we take our oral teachings, our laws from our chapter, and start to put that into writing. What would that look like? So that's one of the exciting initiatives that we're undertaking here at Upper Nicola. Second to that, we're working with BC Housing. So I can't remember if it's 6 or 8, how many First Nations were announced as receiving conditional approval for under the Indigenous Housing Fund. So we've been allocated 24 units. So we're working hand in hand with BC Housing to realize that. We're having to work, of course, with the federal government to get the land situation in place, where we're looking at getting a lease in place. But at the same time, we're working hand in hand with BC Housing to make that happen. So we're thankful to the BC government for helping us work towards identifying or work to find solutions to one of our biggest issues is housing on our reserve. Another big project that we're working on here at Upper Nicola is looking at the government-to-government relationship that we have started to develop over the last couple of years when we're looking to co-manage our watershed. So our community the watershed stems from the Pennask headwaters, which you will drive through or drive across when you're going from Merritt to West Bank. And at the very top where you see some wind towers, that's the Pennask headwaters. And from there, everything that comes down through that watershed will end up passing through our community and onwards onto Merritt, and which will connect, the Nicola River will connect to the Thompson and then the Fraser River. So when you look at that, we are actually developing a co-management agreement to manage our watershed, because water is life. That's a really key initiative that the council is working on. Not to say that we have all the capacities that we need to actually deal with the provincial government on an equal playing field. No, we have so many files that are so important to us. We never want to lose the opportunity to work on these opportunities, so we always take them whenever we can. We have developed a working relationship with the province and Flynn Road in terms of looking at forestry referrals, working with the ARC branch and others when it comes to looking at protecting our title and rights, our self-inherent rights when it comes to protecting our traditional territory. So we've been doing that for many, many years, over 20 years. But I think after we went to a roadblock in 1995, that's when we got the attention of the province. That's when after Delgamuukw decision came down and the province was obligated to consult. Then we started holding the province to task to say that, okay, you're obligated to consult with us. We have an issue with development X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and we want to raise the red flag because this can't happen anymore. So it took a roadblock for our people to initiate in order to get the attention of government. and as a result, we had two bilateral agreements, one with the province and one with the feds. So you can see some of the situations were addressed as a result of those bilateral agreements, but at the same time, some of them still exist because you have new players coming in, and you can almost see the wheel being created right from the beginning. I talked to some of the new council members that are dealing with that. I'm like, we've dealt with that 25 years ago. We shouldn't have to be going back to step one. There has to be easier ways to get around this. One of the key departments we've been working with is EMBC. So Upper Nicola Band is actively still managing 2 emergencies. So we not only are responding to the COVID-19 like the rest of the country, like the rest of the world, but we're also still responding to Spring Freshet 2020. We still have 2 homes evacuated. So when the province through Flynn Road starts to make decisions to regarding water management, that affects not only the city down below Nicola Lake, but it also affects us above Nicola Lake. So we're starting to get on the radar of people that are managing these this infrastructure for the province and starting to say, hey, don't our lives matter? What does it look like if we have First Nations that are evacuated year after year? So within the last 4 years, we've had 3 freshets that we've have had to respond to. And why do we ask? We're looking at global warming, climate change, and everything that has to come with that. So how do we respond to that? So we're getting to know everybody in the Central Creoc very well, and they all know us. And finally, I guess some of the other initiatives we've been working on with the province of BC is through the Crown Corporation. When you look at BC Hydro, in the mid-2000s or early 2000s, we had negotiated an impact benefit agreement as a result of the BC Hydro interior to lower mainland transmission line being expanded. So people in the lower mainland were going to have opportunities to access more energy. And so we have the largest substation in the province located between our 2 reserves. So we were accommodated by the opportunity to develop an energy project. Well, we've been working on that for many years. We've had a couple of councils come in and we've asked our development corporation to do that. So you just look at all of this and think about it. We had, previous to our election that took place in March, we had a council of 6, 1 chief, 5 council members. The chief and 1 council member were full-time. The rest had to have their day jobs and attend meetings during the evening. Second to that, you look at a manpower, woman power of 80 people. That's to ensure that we have a health center, ensure that we have education available for our community members, where we have K-12 opportunities here. We provide assistance to our members for post-secondary education, housing, and we have 80 members to do that. So there's just so many hats that we have to wear. There's so many files that we have to wear. So at the same time, you can probably look at some of the First Nations that you're hearing from today, and you can probably look at the capacity levels as on the higher end. There's a lot of First Nations in the province that don't even have a band administrator, band manager sitting in their office because it's so hard to recruit and retain. So having organizations like the First Nations Public Service Secretariat and all of the other First Nation institutions is a big help for all of us to not only develop capacity, share networking opportunities, come together and help one another, but at the same time, just start to create positive change that can reflect that the First Nations can benefit from. So what we always have to come down to thinking about is, if we want to be self-governing communities one day, how are we going to do that? We know that the governing body they need to move at their pace and do that, but at the same time, as a public service, we as administrators and everyone that works underneath us, we need to be developing our capacities, creating education, and finding a way to implement that. So yeah, just as Sandra had outlined, it is a daunting task, but it's something that we would, if we were asked if we would want to leave our job and go work somewhere else, I would say no. I work 5 minutes down the road from where I live. I enjoy my community and my family, my friends here in the community, and the land that was shown in the video. So we wouldn't want to be anywhere else, but at the same time, any partnerships to help us move forward just a little bit every day, every week, every year is going to help a lot. With that, I thank you all for listening. Bye.
Thank you so much, Collette. And I'm sorry we had to rush through it. You're speaking a million words a minute. Thank you so much for getting through that. We do have some questions in the queue. So some really great questions. So thank you so much for doing that. You can continue to submit them. As usual, typically with our webinars, if we don't get to your questions, I think we promise to always follow up and answer those specifically to the people who are asking them. So thank you, Jehan, for coming back on. I think, is Howard still on? If we can get Howard on, because some of these questions are directed at Howard too as well. But I'm going to jump into the first question, which was upvoted 5 times. So the first question is by an anonymous person. Everybody is anonymous on this webinar. Nobody wants us to give you a shout out. That's okay. Does the FNPSS serve as a function of advising on provincial legislation, policy programs that impact First Nations governance?
Oh,
So that question, oh, go ahead.
Howard, turn your video on so we can see your pretty face. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to say very quickly, and I think Howard can elaborate on this. Yes, FNPSS can advise on those, but the key piece I would encourage all provincial and all government officials to remember is FNPSS does not replace the rights of First Nations themselves and their leadership to be involved and consulted on policies, laws, initiative projects that affect them. We're also not the First Nations Leadership Council. We are not elected. We are not, we don't speak on behalf of First Nations. So we can definitely provide advice on what we have heard. I would offer too that if we had the support of Chief and Council and the Leadership Council to do it, and we would usually ask them for initiatives, we could help coordinate on specific aspects. But again, unfortunately, it's not easy. You have to do the hard work of ensuring that you are consulting with those who have the right to be consulted with. So sorry, like I said, now that sounds kind of harsh, I guess, but yes, we can absolutely help guide you in the right direction, and would be happy to provide coordination, advice, support. We do work with First Nations and hear what they're saying, so we can provide a lot of that unofficial support as well. So Howard, can I ask you to speak too, and hopefully you agree with what I said?
Absolutely, Jehan. And that's a very, very good question, because it leads right into the depth and concerns that we have from a First Nation perspective that you've heard the previous speakers talk about. You know, that again, because of the sad reality that the Crown, federal and provincial, that they only look at certain people and who and they select on and place onto their advisory boards and whatever else that may not have the same kind of depth of tools and education to support their seat on that table. And if I may use as an example, you within bureaucracy, you know, you're always challenged by interest groups, their lobby groups, their lobby efforts, etc. And then a director or program person comes in with an idea. He or she then goes to their director and says, I have this idea. They like it. Then they move towards saying, hey, why don't you create a paper? You know, give me more background or depth. And that is what you call a talking paper. And from there, that talking paper is then shared and is reviewed by that director, and he or she says, oh, I like this, and I'm going to bring it up to my ADM or deputy minister. It then becomes an interest by the deputy and the ADM. Then they say, let's put more teeth and depth to this, and let's create a discussion paper. And that discussion paper is then hived off to other provincial ministries and says, okay, what's the impact to you if we did this? And then let's negotiate from an interest base as to, I'll give you this if you give me that. And then an MC or a memorandum to cabinet is created. To, you know, I'm simplifying it. But then prior to that MC, it is then hived off to a First Nation to say, hey, we're thinking of this, and what do you guys think? And you have 15 to 20 day turnaround time to respond. We don't have all of that expertise, that capacity, nor the time, nor the resources to do an in-depth research and give you a good analysis and an impact to that. So we're placed behind the 8 ball on this, and we need institutions that have that kind of quality to review, analyze, and provide. So you ask us now to participate in legislation, to co-develop legislation, but in reality, it's only co-developed to a certain point, you know, because hard data is not provided, nor do we have it. And what are the implications to other impacts of other areas? So those things are needed and are very necessary. And institutions like the First Nations Public Service can develop that kind of capacity from an institutional perspective that aren't going to absolutely do it, but help train people in other institutions in order to provide that kind of a unique service. So yes, I hear you, and we look forward to those hopefully, opportunities.
Thank you, Howard. We do have only about 10 minutes left to answer your questions, so I'm hoping we can kind of get through as many as we possibly can. The next question was also upvoted, was what would your vision for FNPSS partnerships with the BC ministries on future initiatives? So what is our vision for those relationships?
I could definitely share, but I might ask Collette to maybe jump in and put you up. Do you have, as a band administrator, you listed 9 projects that you're working with the province on. Do you have any other ideas that we could share? And if not, that's okay. I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sure we can jump to it.
Can you unmute?
Off the top of my head, I think it's, I really wouldn't know from the perspective of BC employees. What do you know about First Nations? And I know it's something that we talked about with, even for our federal partners, is that we should be, instead of them coming to us, telling us how things are going to be, we might want to share something with the feds, but this might work with the province as well. Okay, from our perspective, this is what we get from you, and this is how we would actually like it presented, because there's different sizes of communities, different capacity levels, there's different tribal groups. We don't all operate in the same way. We have a lot of commonalities, but at the same time, there might be some specifics that we could help the province out with. So if we could, like, if there's some, if we can assume that not many, or there's not enough knowledge about BC First Nations that come from the community level, those of us that are implementing the programs, maybe that could be something that we could help BC employees with. As well as, I always like the idea of like the mentorship. Come and sit at our table for a couple of days. Come and see what our negotiators, like if you had to come in and represent the First Nation on the government to government discussions on a watershed discussion, how would you handle it? Because we have information here, but we don't have a lot of capacity. And if you could come and see what we're dealing with, then maybe processes could be changed to help improve not only the working relationships, but the expectations for outcomes and deliverables.
Thank you so much. Articulated so very well. Jehan, do you want to add anything to that, or should we move on to the next question?
I just second it wholeheartedly. I could go on for another 10 minutes, so I'll leave that. Absolutely.
All right, next question. Can FNPSS help government policy analysts to learn to apply reconciliation lens to policy reform and development?
Yes, easy, thumbs up. And someone else asked, I think, if we'd be interested in collaborating on ministry-specific training on cultural safety. 100%, like Howard said, I think mentioned at one point, this training, it has to come from First Nations, and Collette mentioned about, sit in their shoes, see how how it works in the community, and then put that lens on how you're developing your policy and your program. So 100% we would be open to doing that.
Great. I'd just like to mention that some of the questions have been answered specifically by Jehan. So if you look, there's several columns in the Q&A option that say open questions, answered questions. So there is some information there for some of the ones that already have been answered. Next question. Jehan mentioned the great work of FNPSS has done consulting with youth on how they'd like to be engaged. Would FNPSS be able to share this work with the BC government?
I would think yes. Once the report, I think we would be happy to share it widely. Selena, you actually were leading this project. What do you think?
Yes, more than happy to share. I think a lot of wonderful, awesome information came from youth. We had identified youth all throughout the province from their communities to talk about how they want to be engaged, because we cannot assume how we should engage with them. We cannot assume their priorities. And so the whole full day discussion was around how they want FNPSS to work with them and how they'd like to have their voice be heard. So more than happy to share with once the report is done with that. All right, next question. Is FNPSS interested in collaborating with ministry-specific training on cultural safety and humility?
We said yes.
Fairly simple, yes. And another anonymous question, can I ask for a bit more information about how the FNPSS thinks about governance in the context of the diverse First Nation communities in the province? We would love to learn more.
Wow. Well, again, I feel like I could talk about the meaning of governance, both for individual communities and all nations across the province for an hour. I keep putting people on the spot, but Howard, I'm wondering if you wanted to take that one. I think it's something that you've been working on your entire life.
Thank you, Jehan. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Collette. To say that I have to say, when I was a younger person, that was only a few years ago, mind you, Collette, that, I joined bureaucracy in 1982, and my colleagues of the day, late George Watts and Joe Mathias and company, all asked me, Howard, what are you doing? We thought you would be the last person to join the enemy. And I said at that particular time that all of our respected leaders of the day talked about a lifelong relationship with the Crown. There will always be that relationship, so in order to bring that to actual life, we needed people like you and I to join bureaucracy, understand the machinery of government so that we can acquire the necessary tools and the forewithal to be able to not fight them, but to develop that relationship and to reconcile what our old people always believed in, which was ours and our rights. So I say thank you to you, and I encourage you to speak continuously to our younger population on that, to say that this is very important. And I say this to you in front of all of these other people because they need to recognize that if they want to acquire that true reconciliation and relationship with our Native people in British Columbia, they need to do that too. If I was a senior deputy minister, part of my policy for hiring would be that you have to do a 2-year assignment on a First Nation community, and then come back into my organization. It will be, because right now there is zero intelligence, on the ground intelligence in regards to who we are, what we are, how we operate, and what are the impacts to us when they create policy and legislation. And that is an absolute necessity. The First Nations Public Service is one such institution that can close that gap and eliminate those cracks by providing a real cross-cultural aspect of of the bureaucrats of the federal and provincial crown, so that they can learn how best to become a true partner in this government to government relationship. So I look at those kinds of things and I see that we can build on those opportunities, but we need your support, yours meaning the crown bureaucrat, and to talk to your senior people, because we have, I believe, only a couple of ADMs and one deputy sitting on this right now. But we need every ministry's deputy minister and ADMs, plural, to be here listening and learning, because there's nowhere else that you're going to get that on-the-ground education and intelligence to help deal with our people and your partners in this future environment.
Thank you so much, Howard. We are at the end of our time, and I know that there was a specific portion that we wanted to keep to the end, but I feel like Howard really spoke to that. But I'll hand it over to Jehan if she has any last comments. You're on mute.
There we go. No, thank you, everyone. We are a couple of minutes over. I'll be quick. I want to say thank you to all of, especially the BC government's staff, officials at all levels who joined us today. Just demonstrating your time or demonstrating your commitment through your time. I want to thank in particular two individuals from my team, our Indigenous Youth Intern, Dee Stewart, and Bernice Timmer, who worked all summer to set this up, to reach out to ministries. You probably got a phone call from Dee at some point, to do the marketing, the planning, putting all of this together. So thank you so much to both of you. And I do hope, a few people have asked for contact information. We'll send it around to everybody after this event, but I really do mean it. Reach out, please. I put my email in the chat and we want to hear from you, and we hope we can move forward with more collaborative work.
Thank you. Thank you all so much to our speakers today. Such wonderful words. Again, this is the beginning of the conversation. It doesn't stop here. The relationship building doesn't stop here. So we definitely hope to hear from you in the future and working together. Thank you all so much. Stay healthy and safe out there. And that's it. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.